Thank you so much for joining us for another Dispatch from the Front Lines. This is an ongoing series from the Congressional Progressive Caucus Center. Each week, we hear from people whose lives have been upended by this pandemic, from our movement partners, and often we are lucky to be joined by special guest congressional champions who are fighting for policy solutions to help our families and communities weather this crisis. For those of you tuning in for the first time, my name is Liz Watson. I am the Executive Director of the Congressional Progressive Caucus Center. We are a nonprofit organization that works to inform the public about policies that promote justice, equity, and fairness. By now, it has become crystal clear that the coronavirus pandemic and the choices of this administration have created an economic disaster. Unfortunately, the worst is still ahead. More than half of US adults no longer have a job. About a third of US households missed housing payments this month. And now we're seeing efforts by Republicans and the White House to slash the incomes of 25 million Americans in the middle of an unprecedented crisis. In March, Congress passed a $600 a week boost to unemployment insurance in the CARES Act. Before that, unemployment insurance replaced less than half of the typical worker's wages. And in some states, unemployment insurance replaced just 25% of a worker's wages or even less. So the $600 lifeline is about to be cut off in only a matter of days. And with it, the incomes of millions of families will be cut drastically. So the ability of families who, through no fault of their own, are out of work to be able to put food on the table, right, is what is at stake here in this crisis. Black, brown, and Indigenous families are being hit the hardest with record-breaking unemployment that is continuing to climb ever higher. So we know that families need lawmakers to save the 600, or we will leave tens of millions with no way to pay rent, mortgages, healthcare, and electric bills. We know we're living in an unprecedented crisis. We know that, frankly, for millions of Americans, there simply aren't jobs to be had. And for millions more, it's simply not currently safe for them to be back at work. So we need to discuss how it is that we are going to solve this crisis and how it is that we're going to continue extending the lifeline of unemployment insurance to millions of Americans. We are so lucky to be joined tonight by an incredible group of grassroots leaders, policy experts, and an outstanding member of Congress who all of whom have been working at the forefront of fighting for the relief that working families need during this crisis. I am very, very honored to have with us here tonight special guests, Representative Dan Kildee of Michigan, Eileen Lymus-Sanders of Unemployed Action, and Nzingha Hooker, a staff attorney with the National Employment Law Project. Unfortunately, Andy Stettner, who was going to join us here tonight, was unable to make it. We are very pleased to have such a terrific lineup of panelists with us. So it's my honor to get to introduce Congressman Dan Kildee. Congressman Kildee represents the 5th District in Michigan. He is the Chief Deputy Whip of the House Democratic Caucus. He serves on the Ways and Means Committee. And earlier this month, Congressman Kildee with Congressman Davis led a letter to the administration urging them to extend the federal pandemic unemployment compensation benefit that is set to expire this week. So, Congressman Kildee, let's talk about unemployment insurance and what you expect might happen at the end of this week and what you are fighting for. The CARES Act boosted unemployment insurance payments for people who lost their jobs due to COVID-19 by about $600 a week through pandemic unemployment compensation. And this has really been such a critical achievement. And I know we have Congressman, how hard you worked for this, how hard your colleagues worked for this, and how hard the advocates on this call worked for this unprecedented expansion of unemployment insurance. And when we think about what a contribution this has been to preventing massive hardship, for millions. I want to thank you and the advocates who are here on this call tonight. But now we're at this crucial juncture. That money is about to run out with tens of millions of people still relying on it. And as I said, really for many, there just are not jobs to be had, right? So this is the lifeline that millions need. So can you tell us a little bit about your efforts to save the $600 unemployment insurance boost and what you're hearing from your constituents about this? Congressman Kildee.
Thank you so much, first of all, for inviting me to be a part of this and for all your great work. This conversation takes place at a really important time. As you said, the CARES Act, which was passed with massive support across the board, provided that $600 pandemic supplement. It was a good idea then. We knew it was a good idea then. That's why Congress did it. And the conditions that it was intending to address are still here. They're still present. So I'm a little, more than a little bit, at a loss how a member of Congress in the House or the Senate that voted with big numbers to put this benefit in place because of the conditions that we were experiencing, when those conditions are still in place, that they would suddenly decide that they don't want to do it anymore. That kind of impatience is not what we need. So I introduced legislation along with Jack Reed, Senator Jack Reed in the Senate, to extend the federal unemployment insurance beyond this end of July, in fact, into next year. And of course, that was supported by all sorts of organizations, labor organizations, disability organizations, affordable housing organizations, educators. Everyone was on board with it. Portions of that bill were included in the HEROES Act, including the expansion of unemployment. We passed the HEROES Act 2 months ago, and the Senate continues to just sit on their hands. Danny Davis, Congressman Danny Davis, my partner in this, who is one of the chairs of the chair of our subcommittee in the House. He and I led a letter that we put together quickly that had 110 of our colleagues encouraging the Trump administration to get on board with this. I've heard from literally, not kidding, thousands and thousands of my constituents who have lost their jobs. And a lot of the work that we've been doing is trying to get them through the UI system so that they can get the benefit that we have given them. We're still working on that. Some of them are just now getting the benefit that we passed, so many weeks ago. And so that $600 was intentional. It was intended to be enough money to keep those families afloat. And I guess the main point that I think we need to be making, first of all, we need to push back against this this confection that some of our opponents have created, that unemployment insurance benefits are so lucrative that people aren't going to work. First of all, that's an insult to the American worker. Secondly, it's patently untrue, and we have research that shows that it's untrue. Third, the reason people aren't going back to work mostly is because there's no work to go back to, number one. Secondly, they're afraid because entering back into the workforce brings with it risks. But the main point is that the money that we put in that unemployment benefit was intended to give people the financial resources they need to follow the medical advice that they're being given. We can't walk away from that logic because Mitch McConnell or somebody is just worn out. We've got to get this done. The other point that I want to make is that we have a lot of our opponents running around patting themselves on the back and congratulating themselves that there's this recovery underway. Well, first of all, for the people who are unemployed, they're not experiencing the recovery. For the people who have been a part of going back to work, the reason they get to go back to work is because there's purchasing power in the economy. That $600 benefit per week doesn't just help those families who would lose everything if they didn't have it. That provides purchasing power. It provides demand in the economy. So the point being, If we don't get this done, not only will so many people lose their lifeline, but unemployment is going to go up because those aspects of our economy that are being supported by that money staying in our economy, by the spending power of the people who have that unemployment benefit, when that leaves, more people will lose their jobs. And we are going to go into a depression. This is a critical moment. And so all these voices need to rise up. We need not apologize for the fact that as a country, we had the back of those people who lost their jobs because of COVID-19. We want them to be able to make the choices that protect their family. This is how we do it, and we need to stay strong.
Well, thank you, Congressman Kildee, for your leadership on the issue, and the point that you're making about what happens when you put money in the pockets of folks who've lost their jobs. They go out and spend it in the economy. It's a virtuous cycle, right? So I think that's exactly the point we all need to be making, and very much appreciate it. I also think with a lot of schools now saying they're not, given that our numbers in many places are not going down, and in fact in many places are rising, it is, unfortunately, we all want our kids to go back to school, but it's not a great time to do it in many places. And there are a lot of folks who are not in a position to work from home, and those families who can't work from home are disproportionately low income, and they're disproportionately Black and brown, and we are seeing these very disparate rates of unemployment for Black and brown workers. And when we talk about racial justice, saving the 600 is such an important racial justice issue. According to the Economic Policy Institute, in the first week of July, an additional 2.4 million workers applied for unemployment insurance. So the need that you're talking about, Congressman, is just clearly still there. To date, a staggering 51 million workers have filed for unemployment insurance in this pandemic. And as I said, there is definitely structural racism is definitely at play in terms of the far disproportionate numbers of unemployed among Black workers. Congressman Kildee, what more can lawmakers do to protect workers of color, and especially Black workers, who we know are not only more likely to be unemployed, but more likely to be essential workers in this workforce, more likely to contract COVID, and frankly experiencing disproportionate death rates as well?
This is a really important point, and this is something that I know something about because my district is a diverse district. I represent the city of Flint, the city of Saginaw, both minority communities. And what we're seeing is COVID-19 is hitting them much harder. A higher death rate, a higher instance of infection than their population, sometimes 2 or 3 times more. And while the national unemployment rate is around 11%, for African American workers, it's over 15%. And in those communities like my hometown, where we've not really ever fully recovered, even from the Great Recession, we have a worse starting point, and so it's even more so. What we know is that racial income and wealth gaps have widened. After the Great Recession, median Black wealth recovery lagged far behind white wealth recovery. And without these necessary unemployment benefits, that's just going to get worse. So what has to happen initially anyway is the Senate has to pass the HEROES Act. I mean, if they have other ideas that they want to talk about, let's have them. But right now we have a plan, they have no plan. And that disproportionately hurts the people who are least navigating this and are at the greatest risk. And because of historic racial wealth gaps, the hardest hit communities and the hardest hit people will be people of color. We see it already right now. So passing the HEROES Act, at least for the moment, helps fill that gap. I mean, we should be proud of the fact that we have made a step toward eradicating, at least in the short term, some poverty, because we lifted some people out of poverty with that. I mean, it does say something about the inequities in our society, this enormously wealthy society, that we actually have policymakers arguing that people who are making what we have provided through this pandemic benefit, they consider it too much money for these folks, that it's uncompetitive because they don't want to work. Well, maybe we need to raise wages. So one of the things we ought to do is pass the Raise the Wage Act. It would get us up to $15 an hour as a minimum wage. If we want to deal with this, if we want to eradicate these inequities, we have to raise the floor. And that's one way to do it. Passing the Elijah Cummings Lower Drug Costs Now Act, which would lower the cost of prescription drugs for families. The disproportionate impact is on the people who are least able to navigate these difficult times, and those are families of color. And of course, getting will also be a step in the right direction. There we can do, but the starting point is to take, essentially, using a medical model, the Hippocratic oath of public policy, and that's first, when we're in crisis, do no harm. And that Hippocratic oath would have us make sure that we stabilize the patient. And the way we do that is to make sure we pass these unemployment benefits so that no more harm, no more economic harm comes to these families in this moment of crisis. Then we can have the debate about the other aspects of our economy and society that we need to employ in order to rectify that. But right now we're in crisis. We've got to act. Public sentiment is everything. We've got to get our voices raised. And I will admit to a little bit of frustration. And I love my colleagues. Don't get me wrong. And I've been leading on this issue because I represent people who need us to succeed on this. That's my job. But more members of Congress need to speak up loudly about the need to get this unemployment benefit passed. And that's what I think we all need to be focusing on. Let's put the pressure on. I think McConnell and some of his members are going to feel this heat, and we need to turn it up. Because if we're arguing about, for example, if they put something on the table that says, oh, we're willing to provide this modest benefit, once we start talking about the number, we're going to win that fight. Mm-hmm. No way on earth they can defend $100 a week or $200 a week for a family that has to take care of itself in the most difficult time in our lifetimes. So once we get into a conversation about the numbers, I think we win. So let's push and push and push. So thank you. Thanks for letting me be a part of this.
Well, thank you, Congressman Kildee, for your leadership, and thank you for what I can tell is your willingness to bring the fight on this issue and to make sure that we preserve what is just a critical lifeline for millions of Americans. So thrilled to have you with us here tonight, and we know that this is an incredibly busy moment for lawmakers, so we aren't going to keep you. We know you probably have your next either potentially in person or Zoom call to get to, and we'll let you go to that. But thank you so much for being here and joining us, and for all the work you're doing on behalf of millions of Americans.
Thank you. Keep up the fight. We're going to win.
So next, I'm really delighted to have Eileen Lymus-Sanders from Unemployment Action here with us tonight. And I'm pleased to be able to introduce her to all of you. Eileen is from Clearwater, Florida. She was a singer and performer on a major cruise line before the pandemic hit. And now Eileen is organizing for Unemployed Action, a new campaign of unemployed workers fighting to save the 600 that is a project of the Center for Popular Democracy. So Eileen, thank you so much for your work on behalf of millions of Americans and their families. And thank you for joining us here tonight. You know, when we really think about the scope of this problem, it's hard to even wrap your head around the numbers. Nearly 50 million people have applied for unemployment insurance since the pandemic began, and a third of tenants, almost a third, weren't able to pay rent just this month. Now we see a $600 expansion to UI, which has made UI from what was really a poverty level benefit into a livable benefit. We see this $600 expansion set to expire at the end of this week. Can you tell us a little bit about how the $600 boost to unemployment insurance has affected your community?
Yes, and thank you for having me. I know I'm speaking for myself, but not only myself, I'm speaking for the 12,699 members of the Unemployed Action Facebook group. And I know I'm speaking for the unemployed across the country when I say we need this help. And so we're appealing to our government for a moratorium. We need a halt, a freeze, a stay, a standstill, a respite, a delay. We, the unemployed, need a moratorium. We're afraid. We are stressed and pressed beyond what is normal. We are scared to death of losing our homes, of losing our cars, having no lights, no food, no water, no uninsurance. We just need a minute. At Unemployed Action, I've read stories of my fellow men and women that have kept me up at night, literally. I wonder, what will Deborah or Kalia or Kathy or Kevin or Chris or Eric or Kylie, Alyssa, Whitney, Miranda, Isaiah, Sharissa, Yari, Trey, and so many others, what will they do if this $600 benefit is not extended? What will I do? I am a professional performer, and I have been for nearly 15 years, 14, 15 years, and my corporate resume has nothing on it since 2006, except for a brief period of time that I worked at Total Wine & More. I have a bachelor's degree in education, but who cares? Employers don't care about that. I have skills in several sectors of business, sales, finance, insurance, yet who is clamoring to hire me? What new skill is going to make me marketable during a pandemic? I'm 53 years old. And so I'm considered an independent contractor or gig worker, so I don't qualify for regular state unemployment. And I'm not one to live beyond my means. So it's not that my expenditures amount to a lot, but now, because of this sharp reduction in my income, I'm barely able to make my necessary bill payments, like my mortgage, my car insurance, my utilities. All of my other bills are at least 2 to 3 months behind. This $600 benefit ends on the 25th of July. And if it's not extended, I will have virtually no income. And that gives me anxiety beyond anything that I can even explain. At this time, there aren't any jobs in my field. The cruise industry and the performance industry on land, they're virtually shut down. And imagine, if you will, just think, if you even can, your entire industry being totally shut down. Totally. That's hard for many people to imagine, but that's what's happening to myself and many other independent contractors, gig workers, performers, and the like. My company is in flux as to when they'll return to service. And even when they do, there's no information as to what their business needs will be at that time. So my date of return to the industry is totally in limbo. I've been applying for other types of work, but the way that things are with pandemic right now, no one's really hiring. And even when I do put an application, they contact me and they say, oh, we have a hiring freeze. I've been performing for nearly 15 years, as I said. So my so-called business resume has no entries since 2006. So no one is really looking to hire a 53-year-old singer who hasn't worked in the business sector for well over a decade. So I'm praying that the federal government extends this $600 benefit, and I'm praying that my job returns within the next few months. If either one of those things happen, I could possibly squeak by, or I can get back to normal. But right now, I'm on the brink of a bankruptcy. So I just need a little bit of time. This pandemic is another beast, and it's becoming more and more difficult to make ends even come close, let alone to make ends meet. And I'm not being dramatic when I say that some of those that are unemployed, they're at the end of their tether. Let me illustrate. When an inmate's on death row, depending on their circumstances or maybe even evidence that wasn't considered previously, that person could be granted a stay. And so here we are, all of us, the unemployed, and we are asking for a stay. We just need a little bit more time. We want to go back to work. I want to go back to work. We're contributing members of this society, and life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, those three examples of the unalienable rights that the Declaration of Independence says have been granted to all humans by their creator, and which the governments are intended and created to protect. So here we all are, all of us, the unemployed, and we're asking our government to protect us.
Eileen, what you just described, having your entire industry shut down overnight is a nightmare scenario that you are living through and that millions of others are living through. And the fact that while living through that nightmare, you are with us to be a voice for millions of Americans and organizing millions to come forward and fight for the unemployment insurance benefits that are so critical. And that, frankly, in the richest nation on earth, in the midst of a pandemic unlike anything we have seen in our lifetimes, it is simply cruel for these benefits not to be extended. So I really appreciate you sharing your own story and that you are hearing from so many other people across this nation who frankly need Congress to act. Something that you mentioned being an independent contractor. You mentioned the importance that regular unemployment insurance hasn't in the past been available to folks who are gig workers or self-employed, and that was a change made that is now possible with the pandemic unemployment compensation program. And that's, one of the really important things, in addition to making this a livable benefit, making sure as our economy changes that all people who are unemployed can access the program. And that has been so important in pandemic unemployment compensation, the ability of self-employed workers, gig workers, independent contractors to access the benefit, and something that we all absolutely need to preserve. And in your own case, it's been so important. I think it might be helpful as we're really painting the picture, and we have a lot of listeners on this call tonight, probably some of whom are in the same boat, but some of whom are really wrapping their heads around, what this means. 50 million folks unemployed, right, for the first time. Could you tell us a little bit about what you're hearing from the workers who you're organizing about what they would like to see from this Congress?
Yes, we are saying we want, deserve, and are demanding that $600 benefit be extended. That's what we're saying. At Unemployed Action, it's a movement vying for people who are unemployed, and we're fighting for Congress to extend that $600 weekly benefit. We are fighting for Congress to increase funding to states to process the claims faster, because that's another issue, is the lag, for lack of a better term. Lag would probably be good, but lag in processing the claims, and also to expand the benefits to communities that have been historically excluded. There's several ways that we are taking action at Unemployed Action. We're hosting live and virtual town halls around the country, live where it's deemed okay to do so. We are signing and sharing petitions. We are calling, we are texting, we are emailing senators, sending emails to Congress. We're also texting constituents and invited them to take action by calling, testing, tweeting, signing, all of the social media platforms. As administrators on the site, we are also steering those who need additional help in the proper direction, maybe possibly directing them or referring them to legal aid in their area. And then, because one of the hardest things to read in the evening is hearing not just the angry, but the people who are in despair and are actually falling into depression over this, over the anxiety of this this benefit not being extended, that is one of the hardest things to read when you want to reach out and hug someone and they're all the way on the other side of the country and they, and they're feeling so in despair. That is one of the difficult things. So we try to assist in that way as well by just providing comfort. First of all, if we see that, we don't just say, here's a number. We try to sympathize and empathize with them as much as possible. But we do refer them to phone numbers and website addresses for resources for mental health as well in their area. So this is Unemployed Action has been. I don't even know how I got involved with Unemployed Action, but I am so glad that I did. I think I clicked on something or I signed something and it all came and I was like, yes, tell me what I need to do. So I'm so glad that I have. And so with this platform, I'm just saying, I want every single person that is listening to this right now, they need to call their state representatives and we're demanding that they extend this $600 benefit. The government is in place for the people. They work for us, and that's what we need them to do. We need them to work for us, and that's what we're doing at Unemployed Action.
Well, that is absolutely fantastic, and I want to note that we do have a link on your screen that you can go to save the 600, to share your story and stand with us here tonight. So please do click on that link right now. And Eileen, I'm glad you pointed out the struggles that folks are facing at the state level in terms of, and I bet you're getting a lot of these stories, in terms of some folks who are having trouble getting their benefits processed. And we are hearing about that and the need for additional funding to help state unemployment agencies process these claims and process them in a timely way so that people can get the help they need. Put food on the table. So I think that really is a really important issue as well, making sure that we're able to modernize our unemployment system to serve everyone who needs help. And so I just want to really thank you for your leadership and for standing up and making your voice heard, and also for pointing out the real human cost and the toll this is taking on people and their families, and the compassion that you're showing as you talk to people and field their emails. And I'm sure it's really hard to be in the hot seat on the receiving end of so much anguish and despair. And I want to urge you I want to thank you and urge all of us to be a part of the solution here tonight in terms of saving the 600 and just to really thank you for being in this fight and for having taken it on in such an incredibly difficult time. Thanks for your leadership.
Thank you for having me. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak.
Oh, absolutely. It's our honor to have you here. So now I want to turn to Anzinga Hooker, who is a staff attorney with the National Employment Law Project. Nzingha works on the social insurance and work equity teams at NELP, which is based in Washington, D.C. And NELP has been a longtime fighter for worker justice on a whole wide range of issues, and really was at the forefront of the fight to expand unemployment insurance through the pandemic unemployment compensation package, and is now at the forefront of the fight to continue that expansion. So Nzingha's work focuses on collaborating with and providing technical assistance to NELP state partners through research, advocacy, exploration, and engagement on policies related to unemployment insurance and other social insurance programs. And she works to increase access to quality jobs for Black workers. So Nzingha, thank you so much for joining us for this important conversation tonight, and also for NELP's leadership in when you think about the various forms of relief that have been provided. So far by Congress, the securing the win of unemployment insurance that NELP is so significantly responsible for. I just can't think of anything that's really been more meaningful for millions of Americans across the country in terms of allowing folks to stay afloat. So I want to thank you for that. And then I would love to hear from you about the work you're doing now to save the 600, to save that big win and strengthen the unemployment insurance system going forward.
Sure, Liz, and thank you for that introduction and for having me join this webinar. I do want to take a moment to say thank you, Eileen, for your fight. Thank you so much for that and for all the work you're doing. And before I get into that question a little bit more, I do want to say it has been the workers who have been directly impacted by this crisis who have been leading this work. And to start, right now, and a number of you guys have said this on here, over 30 million unemployed workers are able to receive $600 a week in addition to their regular unemployment insurance benefit. But the Trump administration is pushing to cut that benefit this week, and they're threatening to cut that off on July 25th. And that would be a hard hit to many workers in the US and a cut to a critical lifeline during an ongoing pandemic and unemployment crisis. And at a time when coronavirus cases in many states are spiking and businesses are continuing to face mass closure. So an act by Congress to cut the 600 is bad for workers, is bad for the public health, and for our economy. It's particularly dangerous, and Liz, you spoke of this, and Representative Kildee spoke of this, is particularly dangerous for Black and brown workers who have been hit the hardest in this COVID-19 crisis and who face the highest unemployment rates. So NELP has been a part of this coalition of more than 15 organizations and a few labor unions, including our friends here at the Progressive Caucus Center and Andy with the Century Foundation, who is going to join, that are working on a national campaign where we are demanding that the Trump administration and Congress extend the $600 in pandemic unemployment compensation until the nationwide unemployment crisis is sufficiently under control. The crisis supplement to general unemployment insurance is income for people to pay for basic necessities and emergency expenditures. It is a key lifeline for people of color and women who have been segregated into jobs that underpay. And NELP is fighting for two other big things. NELP is fighting to make state unemployment, to make unemployment extensions and expansions automatic. There should be automatic triggers tied to state unemployment rates to expand payment durations and expand unemployment insurance weeks available. And NELP is also fighting for the prioritization of worker safety and health. It just has to be made clear that workers can refuse any job that endangers their health and safety without losing their unemployment insurance. And those demands are about the immediate inequities that the government at all levels must address. And I'm going to share some of the actions and events that have been held recently to push those demands forward. Today, as many of you on this call may know, unemployed workers and their supporters held a day of action, both in person and digitally, to demand that lawmakers and President Trump extend the $600 a week. The day kicked off with a press conference at the U.S. Capitol building, where a number of unemployed workers spoke about saving the $600 and the impact that benefit has had on them and their families. Members of Congress joined as well to talk about their support for extending the pandemic unemployment compensation, including Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon and Representative Danny Davis from Illinois, who was mentioned on this call earlier. And prior to today, a number of state organizations, including organizations in Florida, in North Carolina, and Texas, and Arizona, New York, just a number of states have been holding town halls asking that their representatives support extension of the $600 that unemployed workers and their families rely on. For example, some pretty amazing organizations came together in Florida and held a town hall for Florida, folks in Florida to attend, to hear local stories and to share their own stories. They invited multiple state representatives to attend, and they demanded that Senators Scott and Rubio vote to extend the federal $600 to all those out of work. And as I'm sure you know, Florida COVID-19 cases are extremely high. And with some businesses still closed or operating at half capacity, Floridians are relying on that $600 supplement. So that's a lot of the work that has been happening around the Save the 600 campaign. And I just want to touch on some more long-term UI advocacy work. Issues that NELP has always focused on that we believe will strengthen the unemployment insurance system include pushing policymakers to ensure unemployment insurance remains available and it is transformed. And you mentioned, Liz, modernization. Congress should require states to update its technology to increase its payments and remove systemic barriers so unemployment insurance is available to all workers who need it. And that's especially Black people and workers of color, including immigrants and people working part-time. And the last thing that I'll say on this is that NELP has a number of resources for workers on our website, unemployedworkers.org, and you can access that website through a link on our homepage at nelp.org. And I share that because we have been working with partners in different states to address UI issues and answer questions. And through working with those state partners, we have been hearing from workers about what they need. We just have been responding to that by providing those resources that on that website. So thank you.
That's fantastic, and thank you so much for being in this fight for the long haul to update the unemployment insurance system to really provide the livable benefits that all workers need and to be available to all workers. And Nzingha, one of the things that you said really struck me. You mentioned that there are workplaces right now, COVID cases are on the rise in many places. We do not yet have an enforceable occupational safety and health standard in workplaces across the country. And many workers we know are getting sick on the job. And we have heard and seen horrible reports of rampant COVID-19 infections, for example, what we've seen in poultry processing plants. So this concern around workers being called back to work in unsafe conditions and potentially the potential for losing unemployment insurance if they say no, in fact, it is not safe for me to return and I can't go back to this workplace because it is not safe. That I know is something that workers have been deeply concerned about. It is something that we've heard about across the country. And I wonder if you want to address that issue a little further.
Yeah, so we have a number of experts at NELP, and you may have had some conversations with them, Debbie Berkowitz and Shayla Thompson, who have been really addressing the issue of return to work and a conversation and research around what suitable work. Because as you know, the unemployment insurance program requires that workers accept suitable work. And what that means in this particular crisis is something that a lot of people are working on right now. So, and I think you said a lot of this, Liz, is that because Black and Brown workers are placed in industries and employment that are underpaid and are placed in industries and employment that are hard work, is dirty work, is difficult work. A lot of those communities are highly impacted by health and safety issues. And I don't want to get too much into it because that's not my line of work, Liz, but we have a number of experts at NELP who are addressing worker health and safety issues.
Mm-hmm. And I really appreciate the work that you and your colleagues at NELP are doing to make sure that folks can't be sent back to work and off unemployment before it's safe. And your point about the disproportionate impact of lack of health and safety standards on Black and Brown workers is such an important one. I know you touched on this a little bit, but I think it would be helpful for people to hear a little bit about, in particular, the disparate unemployment crisis for Black and Brown communities and how those numbers have looked different and why this is a solution that really we have to do for race if we're going to get serious about racial justice, why this unemployment insurance is a racial justice issue.
Yeah. And yeah, I guess the short answer to that is that COVID-19 and the unemployment crisis has affected Black and Brown communities quite drastically. And what I think we have to be clear about is that this is not because of individual failings, but this is a systemic issue. It is the effect of racism, wealth inequality, and deep structural inequities that shape our social determinants of health, right? So that's the physical, that's the social and the economic conditions in which we are born, in which we live and we work. And if we take a quick step back, in a really quick labor history, I'm not a big history buff, but a quick look at labor history in this country, what we will see is that many of the systems in the US, including unemployment insurance, are tied to an economy that was founded on enslaving and extracting labor from Black people. After chattel slavery was abolished in this country, white people were empowered to devise new ways to boost the economy and extract wealth from Black workers, either by limiting wages, empowered to demand better jobs, or restricting Black workers to certain occupations. When the New Deal era laws were enacted in the 1930s, they largely excluded domestic workers and agricultural workers, who are predominantly Black people. And currently, Black, Indigenous, and Latinx workers are disproportionately represented in jobs that underpay. And therefore, Black and brown workers are unable to save for emergencies. And this is due to structurally racist barriers to employment. As Representative Kildee said earlier, Black workers in particular were still in recovery from the last recession, long after a large part of the economy had stabilized. Black workers often earn too little to qualify for unemployment insurance. Black and brown workers are disproportionately misclassified as independent contractors, meaning many states mistakenly exclude them from receiving unemployment insurance in the first place. So with the pandemic devastating the economy, the unemployment rates was last reported to be 16.8%. That's 16.8% for Black workers compared to 12.4% for white workers. And even before the pandemic, Black unemployment rate had been consistently higher than a white unemployment rate. And normally that ratio is twice the rate. And I just want to draw on Washington, D.C. as an example. And I'm based in Washington, D.C. And I have been supporting the work of a local organization here in the district called One D.C. And it houses a Black worker center. And prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, knelt together with One DC, held a listening session with Black workers about unemployment and about unemployment compensation in DC. And one of the things we talked about during that listening session is the positioning of Black workers in the economy. And when we hear reports about the DC economy, to think about who is included and who is excluded from the data, because often we would hear about DC being one of the strongest economies in the US. However, the Black unemployment rate in DC pre-pandemic, and these numbers are from 2019, was 11.2%. And it was the highest unemployment rate in the country. In 2019, the District of Columbia had a Black-white ratio higher than the normal. It was 6.5 to 1. So in these unprecedented health and economic crisis, unemployment insurance and pandemic unemployment supplement is a lifeline for families, especially for underpaid and undervalued Black and Latinx workers, most of all women. And I'll just quickly say that there was a congressional budget report released on July 1st that found that 47% of workers receiving unemployment insurance in July and facing a cutoff of that $600 are people of color, and 53% of workers receiving unemployment insurance who is subject to that cutoff are women. And I know we wanted to talk about how the lives of people will be impacted by that $600 boost if it expires. And I'll just quickly say that without that $600 compensation, as many as 3 million unemployed workers will receive an average of $370 a week, which replaces about 44% of the average wage. And that's about $9.25 an hour for full-time work. And we know that's not nearly enough to cover basic living costs like rent, utilities, and food. And when we look at some states, for example, 47% of Black people live in the 14 states with the stingiest unemployment compensation. And you can take a look at Mississippi, which has a maximum weekly benefit amount of $235. And Florida has a maximum weekly benefit amount of $275. And in Arizona, it's $240. So the states that have done the most to erect hurdles in accessing unemployment insurance also heavily correlate with states where the workforce includes more Black and Latinx workers. So with the pandemic, unemployment compensation is a public health measure. And what we have been saying at NELP is that worker health is public health. And the PUC is a public health measure because it empowers workers to cover basic expenses while they remain home until it's safe to go back to work. And eliminating that benefit will rush people back to work before it's safe, possibly creating a rise in preventable cases. And I'll just close here with the pandemic unemployment compensation can provide economic stability to unemployed Black workers and other workers of color who are often left behind by this unemployment insurance system.
Well, thank you so much, Nzingha, for your incredible advocacy with unemployed workers and for sharing the work that you're doing in the district. I think, when we look at what is happening with unemployment compensation right now, often what folks say about this crisis is there are a lot of families across this country who were living in crisis before this crisis, right? So before this crisis even started, there were a whole lot of people in low-wage jobs who were living in crisis, and that was a crisis of structural racism. It was a crisis of an economic system that systematically devalues workers in hourly jobs. And the $600 boost to unemployment compensation has been so important just in terms of finally making unemployment compensation a livable benefit. Because the numbers you were describing about, how low unemployment benefits are in so many states across this country. And I noticed how many of the states you were describing corresponded with states that are currently seeing a massive rise in COVID cases, right? We have to do better than that. And so, what we're really seeing with this unemployment compensation and the changes that Eileen, you're fighting for, and Nzingha, you're fighting for, are a much more just and livable unemployment insurance system. And that is what we need right now to get ourselves through this crisis and keep people safe. But it's also what we need for the long term. And so, Eileen, it was just absolutely phenomenal to hear about the work that you are doing with Unemployed Action and with workers across the country. And thank you so much for rolling up your sleeves and pitching in. I can hear the passion in your voice and what an incredible organizer you are. And we need incredible organizers right now because we need to win this fight. I also want to thank Representative Dan Kildee of Michigan, who has been a champion on this issue in Congress. I'm not going to thank my dog. For those of you who can hear him barking, he's in trouble. And Anzinga Hooker, a staff attorney with the National Employment Law Project, Eileen Lymus-Sanders of Unemployed Action, a project of the Center for Popular Democracy. I want to thank our folks who are with us here tonight from ACT TV for their able work broadcasting this really important conversation. I'm sorry, Andy Stettner from the Century Foundation was unable to join us here tonight, but we're grateful for his advocacy. And I also want to thank the wonderful team that I have at the Congressional Progressive Caucus Center who puts these events on. We are really very fortunate to have incredible folks on our comms team. So we have Jess Juarez Scruggs, Parker Breza, Laura Collins, and often joined by their colleague Vimala Pongsavan and Hiba Kassam, as well as our terrific labor fellow Sejal Singh, who has been such a passionate advocate on this and all worker justice issues during her time with us. So I want to thank each and every one of you for watching this broadcast with us here tonight. I want to encourage you, if we could show the action on the screen, to get involved and to make your voices heard. Go ahead and click the link to sign up to make a difference on behalf of working families across this country. If you haven't gone to the action link, now is your chance. So thank you all so much for being here for this important conversation. Thank you for being in the fight with us to save the 600. Thank you to the incredible advocates who joined us on this call. For your passion, your determination, and the long hours of hard work that you've put into this effort. Thank you all for joining us, and good night.